You change your entire life to become invisible. You take the graveyard shift mask you're sent and hide from the world's elite. But what happens when the most powerful, terrifying alpha in the city decides your midnight counter is the only place he can breathe? This is Oliver's nightmare. The neon sign of the Walgreens on the corner of North Michigan Avenue and East Grand buzzed with a relentless, erratic hum. For most people in Houston, the flickering red light was a nuisance. For Oliver Hayes, it was a beacon of safety. Oliver was a 24-year-old unmarked Omega. In the cutthroat corporate hierarchy of the city's financial district, where alphas dominated the boardrooms and betas managed the grueling middle-tier workloads, Omegas like Oliver were expected to be quiet, submissive, and heavily bonded to a protector. Oliver wanted no part of that. He had spent his early 20s working a daytime desk job at Apex Financial, enduring the suffocating aggressive pheromones of executives who viewed him as a walking target. The final straw had been a terrifying encounter in an elevator with a senior VP and alpha whose predatory instincts had nearly crossed the line into assault. After that day, Oliver quit. He shattered his daytime existence, broke his lease, and moved to a cramped apartment in Rogers Park. He sought out the one place where high-powered alphas rarely tread the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. graveyard shift at a downtown pharmacy. At 2 a.m., the world belonged to the tired, the broken, and the invisible. The blinding fluorescent lights of the pharmacy aisles washed out the vibrant colors of the city. Oliver would stand behind the register, clad in his oversized blue polo shirt, wearing scent patches on his scent glands that smelled of cheap synthetic lemon to mask his natural soothing scent of white tea and rain. Here he was safe. Here he was nobody, until the first week of November. It was a Tuesday night, the kind of freezing Houston evening where the wind off Lake Michigan felt like tiny shards of glass. The automatic doors slid open with a jarring metallic scrape. The sudden influx of icy air wasn't what made Oliver freeze, however. It was the scent. Before the man even stepped fully into the light, the atmosphere in the store shifted. The air grew heavy, dense, and suffocatingly cold. It smelled like crushed obsidian winter frost and a deeply unsettling note of burning ozone. It was the unmistakable, unadulterated pheromone signature of an apex alpha. Oliver's breath hitched in his throat. His Omega instincts, usually suppressed by a cocktail of daily suppressants, screamed at him to drop to his knees and bare his neck in submission. He gripped the edge of the laminate counter so hard his knuckles turned white, fighting the biological urge to surrender. Out of the shadows stepped Roland Pendleton. Even if Oliver hadn't recognized the terrifyingly sharp jawline or the piercing ice-blue eyes from the covers of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, the man's aura demanded absolute obedience. Roland was the 32-year-old CEO of Pendleton Global Dynamics, a logistics empire that practically owned the city's shipping infrastructure. He was notoriously ruthless, famously unmarried, and possessed a reputation so cold that even other alphas avoided his gaze. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal wool overcoat that probably cost more than Oliver made in 3 years. His dark hair was slightly damp from the sleet outside. What is a billionaire doing in a pharmacy at 2 a.m? Oliver panicked internally, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Please don't look at me. Please just buy whatever you need and leave. Roland didn't grab a basket. He didn't browse. He walked with slow, deliberate steps down the central aisle, his polished leather shoes silent against the linoleum. Every muscle in Oliver's body was locked tight. He watched as the alpha stopped by the cold and flu section, standing perfectly still for nearly 5 minutes. Then Roland turned. His gaze locked onto Oliver. The distance between them was at least 40 feet, but Oliver felt the impact of that stare like a physical blow. Roland's eyes were devoid of warmth, calculating and terrifyingly empty. He walked up to the counter, his overwhelming scent rolling over Oliver in invisible, suffocating waves. The synthetic lemon patch on Oliver's neck felt entirely useless against the sheer pressure of the Alpha's presence. Roland placed a single item on the counter, a bottle of heavy-duty over-the-counter sleep aids. $9.45. Oliver managed to squeak out, hating how small and trembling his voice sounded. Roland didn't say a word. He retrieved a sleek black titanium credit card from his wallet and tapped it against the reader. While the machine processed the transaction, Roland leaned slightly forward. He didn't look at the screen. He kept his eyes fixed directly on Oliver's throat, right where the scent gland was hidden beneath the collar of his shirt. The receipt printed with a harsh, tearing sound. Roland took the bottle turned on his heel and walked out into the freezing night. Oliver collapsed back onto the stool, gasping for air, his body trembling violently. He told himself it was a fluke, a random, terrifying anomaly. Billionaires had insomnia too. But 2 nights later, at exactly 2:14 a.m., the doors opened again. The scent of frost and ozone flooded the store. Roland Pendleton had returned. This time, he didn't buy anything. He simply walked the perimeter of the store, his heavy gaze eventually landing on the register. He stood by the magazine rack for 20 minutes, just watching Oliver. The silence was deafening. The sheer psychological terror of being stalked by a man who could ruin his life with a single phone call began to unravel Oliver's carefully constructed piece. By the second week, it became a horrifying routine. Every night between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., Roland would appear. Sometimes he bought a black coffee. Sometimes he bought nothing. But he always stayed. He always watched. And the heavy, suffocating scent of his alpha dominance lingered in the pharmacy long after the sun came up. Oliver was working nights to avoid alphas. Instead, he had somehow lured the most dangerous one in Houston straight into his sanctuary. By the 3rd week of November, Oliver's nerves were completely shattered. He was losing sleep during the day, haunted by dreams of ice-blue eyes and the smell of burning ozone. He had tried talking to his manager, a gruff beta named Harrison, begging to be switched back to daytime hours. "Are you out of your mind, Ollie?" Harrison had laughed, reviewing inventory sheets in the back office. "Pendleton is basically royalty. If he wants to wander the aisles of our store at 3 in the morning, we let him. He's not hurting anyone, and his security detail stays outside. You're overthinking this." "I'm not overthinking this," Oliver thought desperately. "You can't feel it because you're a beta." Harrison couldn't feel the crushing weight in the air when Roland entered the room. He couldn't sense the way Roland's pheromones seemed to reach out, probing the space, actively seeking out Oliver's suppressed scent. It felt invasive. It felt like a hunt. It was the night before Thanksgiving when the routine finally broke, and the terrifying truth of the situation was revealed. A severe winter storm had battered Houston, burying the streets in a foot of snow. The city was a ghost town. The plow trucks hadn't even made it to North Michigan Avenue yet. Oliver was alone in the store, certain that even Roland Pendleton wouldn't brave a blizzard just to terrorize a night clerk. At 3:15 a.m., the power grumbled, the fluorescent lights flickering before dimming to half capacity. The emergency backup generators kicked in, casting the aisles in a sickly yellow glow. Then the automatic doors forced themselves open, groaning against the snow packed against the sensors. Roland stumbled inside. This time, the terrifying, immaculate CEO was gone. Roland was leaning heavily against the doorframe, his overcoat unbuttoned, his tie loose. His face was pale, glistening with a sickly sheen of sweat, and his breathing was ragged. But the most alarming thing was his scent. It wasn't the controlled dominant frost and ozone that usually terrified Oliver. It was fractured. The smell was wild, completely unhinged, and reeked of extreme biological distress. The scent of ozone was so sharp it physically stung Oliver's eyes. Roland was in the middle of a pheromone crash, a rare, excruciatingly painful condition that happens when a dominant alpha suppresses their ruts for too long, causing their central nervous system to turn against them. It could lead to organ failure if not medically treated. Panic seized Oliver. His rational brain told him to run to the back room, lock the heavy steel door, and call an ambulance. But his deep-seated Omega biology, the very instincts he had tried to bury with patches and suppressants, screamed at him to help. The Alpha was in agony. Roland took 2 agonizing steps into the store before his knees buckled. He collapsed against an end-cap display of vitamins, sending bottles clattering to the linoleum floor. A low, guttural groan tore from his throat. "Mr. Pendleton!" Oliver yelled, abandoning his post behind the register. He ran around the counter, his sneakers squeaking on the wet floor. He skidded to a halt a few feet away from the massive Alpha. Up close, the heat radiating off Roland's body was intense. Roland's eyes snapped open, locking onto Oliver. The irises weren't their usual cold blue. They were dilated, practically black with pain and feral instinct. "Stay back," Roland growled. The voice was a jagged rasp, scraping against Oliver's eardrums. It was a command heavy with alpha authority, but it trembled with exhaustion. "You need an ambulance. I'm calling 911. Oliver reached into his pocket for his phone. "No." Roland barked the sheer force of the order, making Oliver's hand freeze. Roland squeezed his eyes shut, pressing a shaking hand against his temple. No hospitals. The press. The board. He gasped for air, his chest heaving. "If the board finds out my biology is failing, they'll strip the company from me." "You're having a crash," Oliver said, his voice shaking. He knelt, cautiously keeping his distance. "You need a bonded Omega, or you need medical suppressants injected directly into your bloodstream. I only have over-the-counter beta blockers. They won't stop this." "I know," Roland gritted out. He looked up, his gaze locking onto Oliver's neck. "I don't need pills." Before Oliver could react, Roland's hand shot out. His grip was like a steel vice wrapping around Oliver's wrist. He didn't pull the Omega down, but the physical contact sent a shock wave of electric heat straight up Oliver's arm. "Let go of me." Oliver panicked, struggling against the hold. The ghosts of his past trauma roared in his head. "He's going to attack. He's feral." "Please," Roland whispered. The word froze Oliver completely. The most terrifying man in Houston was begging. Roland's head slumped forward, his forehead resting heavily against Oliver's forearm. He wasn't attacking. He was clinging. "Take off the patch." Roland rasped, his breath hot against Oliver's skin. "Your scent patch. Take it off." "No." Oliver said, tears of absolute terror prickling his eyes. "If I take it off, you're an alpha in a crash. You'll lose control. I have been coming to this godforsaken pharmacy for 3 weeks." Roland breathed his voice, barely more than a rough vibration against Oliver's arm. "Every night my body tries to tear itself apart. My doctors told me I was going to die if I didn't find an anchor. I tried synthetics. I tried clinics in Switzerland. Nothing worked, until I walked in here." Oliver's heart pounded furiously. "I don't understand." Roland lifted his head slightly. his dark eyes meeting Oliver's terrified gaze. "Your scent, even through that cheap lemon garbage you wear. I can smell it. White tea. Rainwater. It's the only thing that calms the fire in my blood. I don't want to hurt you, Oliver. I just need to breathe you in." Oliver's breath hitched. He knows my name. The Alpha wasn't stalking him to claim him. He was stalking him to survive. Roland's entire massive frame was trembling now, his grip on Oliver's wrist loosening as his strength finally gave out. He was dying right there on the floor of aisle 3. With shaking fingers, Oliver reached up to his own neck. He found the edge of the medical-grade scent patch. If he peeled it off, his true Omega scent would flood the space. It was a massive risk. It went against every survival instinct he had honed over the last 4 years. But looking down at the broken, shivering titan on the floor, Oliver couldn't let him die. Oliver ripped the patch off. Instantly the air shifted. The sharp, suffocating smell of Roland's ozone crash hit a wall of sweet, pure white tea and fresh, calming rain. Oliver's natural pheromones bloomed into the cold air, washing over the Alpha like a soothing balm. Roland inhaled sharply, a shuddering, desperate breath. The feral darkness in his eyes began to recede, replaced by a profound, agonizing relief. He slumped fully against the shelving unit, his eyes closing as he bathed in the scent he had spent weeks hunting. "Thank God," Roland whispered into the quiet, snow-muffled pharmacy. Oliver sat on the cold floor, his wrist still loosely held by the billionaire, realizing with a sinking dread that his quiet, invisible life was officially over. He was the only lifeline for a man who owned half the city. And Roland Pendleton was never going to let him go. The deafening roar of a heavy-duty snowplow violently shattered the fragile silence inside the pharmacy. Flashing amber lights cut through the yellow gloom of the backup generators, but it wasn't city workers stepping out into the blizzard. 3 matte-black SUVs had brutally forced their way over the snowbanks, parking directly on the sidewalk of North Michigan Avenue. Within seconds, the automatic doors were pried open. 5 men in tactical winter gear swarmed the aisles. They were Alphas, every single one of them, their heavy combative scents instantly suffocating the small space. Oliver scrambled backward, pressing his spine against the pharmacy counter, his heart hammering in his throat. "Boss!" The lead security officer, a massive man named Barrett, rushed toward aisle 3. He stopped dead in his tracks when he hit the invisible wall of scent. Roland Pendleton was still slumped against the shelving unit, but the violent trembling had stopped. His breathing was deep and even. He slowly opened his eyes, the feral, agonizing darkness completely gone, replaced by a terrifyingly sharp, lucid ice blue. "I'm fine, Barrett," Roland said. His voice was no longer a ragged gasp. It was the low, commanding rumble of an apex predator who had regained his throne. He pushed himself off the floor, straightening his bespoke overcoat with unnerving calm. "Sir, the medical extraction team is on standby at the street." Regisor Barrett reported, his eyes darting suspiciously toward Oliver, who was still trembling on the floor. "Should we secure the perimeter and neutralize the witness?" Oliver stopped breathing. Neutralize. "Touch him!" Roland growled, the temperature in the room seemingly dropping 10 degrees. "And I will personally throw you off the balcony of the 95th floor." Barrett immediately averted his gaze, submitting to the overwhelming authority. "Understood, sir. Your orders." Roland turned his gaze down to Oliver. The terrifying CEO was back, but there was a strange, possessive softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Oliver Hayes, you are walking out of this door with me." I have a shift," Oliver stammered frantically, looking toward the register. "Harrison will fire me. I just bought this entire building. "And the franchise rights to this block," Roland stated flatly, pulling his phone from his pocket and sending a single text message. "You no longer work here. You are coming with me, because if I leave your proximity, the crash will resume, and I will be dead before sunrise." Oliver had no choice. He was ushered into the back of a heavily armored SUV, sandwiched between Roland and the heavily tinted window. The drive through the buried streets of Houston was agonizingly silent. The intense heat radiating from Roland's body was a constant, terrifying reminder of the biological tether that had just been forged between them. They arrived at the St. Regis Houston, bypassing the lobby entirely via a subterranean private elevator that shot them up to the penthouse. The doors opened into a sprawling, multi-million-dollar fortress of floor-to-ceiling glass, black marble, and cold modern art. It was beautiful, but to Oliver it felt like a maximum security prison. Waiting in the living room was Dr. Alistair Reed, a private concierge physician with a grim expression and a mobile blood analysis laboratory set up on the dining table. "Shirt off, Roland," Dr. Reed commanded, instantly drawing vials of blood the moment Roland sat on the leather sofa. Oliver stood awkwardly by the elevator, wrapping his arms around himself. He wanted to reapply his scent patch, but the moment his hand brushed his neck, Roland released a low, warning growl from across the room. Oliver dropped his hands. 10 minutes later, the blood centrifuge beeped. Dr. Reed's face went completely pale. "Roland," the doctor whispered, pulling up a complex chemical graph on his tablet. "This wasn't a natural pheromone crash. Your biology didn't fail you." Roland leaned forward, his jaw tight. "Explain." "Your daily synthetic suppressants, they've been laced." Dr. Reed said, his voice trembling. "Someone introduced a synthetic enzyme inhibitor into your capsules. It was designed to slowly break down your alpha receptors over the last month, mimicking a natural terminal rut failure. If you had gone to a hospital tonight, the corporate medical examiners would have declared you biologically unfit." The room fell into a deathly silence. Oliver felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't just a medical emergency. It was an assassination attempt. "Preston Gallagher." Roland said the name, sounding like venom on his tongue. "The chief operating officer," Dr. Reed asked, shocked. "He's been maneuvering the board of directors for 6 months," Roland said, standing up and pacing the marble floor, his sheer presence making the glass windows rattle. "If I am declared biologically unstable, the corporate charter invokes Clause 44. Preston seizes control of a $40 billion logistics empire by sunrise." Roland stopped pacing and turned slowly toward Oliver. The intensity in his gaze pinned Oliver to the wall. "Preston's proxy medical examiner is coming here tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. under the guise of a wellness check requested by the board," Roland stated. "If they find me alone, suffering from withdrawal, they will forcefully commit me and take the company." "What are you saying?" Oliver whispered, terrified of the answer. "I am saying, Oliver, that the only way to override Clause 44 and prove my biological stability is to present a bonded, fated Omega to the board." Roland walked toward him, stopping just inches away. The scent of frost and ozone wrapped around Oliver like a heavy blanket. "I need you to be my anchor. I need you to stand beside me tomorrow and claim me." "I can't." Oliver panicked, backing up until his shoulders hit the cold glass of the window overlooking the freezing city. "I left the corporate world to escape people like Preston. I was assaulted by an executive at Apex Financial. I was treated like absolute garbage because I'm an unmarked Omega. I am not stepping back into a boardroom to be a pawn in a billionaire's war." Roland's expression softened. He reached out his massive, warm hand, gently resting against the glass beside Oliver's head. Who assaulted you at Apex Financial? Roland asked softly. A senior vice president. Oliver choked out tears of frustration, blurring his vision. Gregory Thorne. Roland pulled his phone out, tapped the screen a few times, and held it up for Oliver to see. It was a digital dossier. Gregory Thorne's face was on the screen, shaking hands with another man on a golf course. The other man was Preston Gallagher. Preston owns a controlling stake in the Apex, Roland said quietly. He uses it as a training ground for his aggressive executives, the men who hurt you, the system that forced you to hide in a pharmacy at 2 a.m. They all report to Preston. Oliver stared at the screen, a cold, deep fury igniting in his chest. The fear that had dictated his life for the last 4 years suddenly curdled into pure, unadulterated rage. He looked up at Roland, meeting the terrifying Alpha's gaze without flinching. If I do this, Oliver said, his voice dropping an octave, steady and absolute. If I stand by you tomorrow, you destroy him. You tear his empire down to the studs. A dangerous, predatory smile spread across Roland's face. With pleasure. The morning sun reflected blindingly off the snow-covered skyline of Houston. Inside the penthouse, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. At exactly 8 a.m., the private elevator chimed. Preston Gallagher strode into the penthouse, looking every bit the triumphant conqueror. He was an older alpha, sharply dressed in a navy pinstripe suit, exuding a foul scent of bitter espresso and copper. Flanking him were 3 corporate lawyers and Dr. Henry Arris, the board's merciless chief medical examiner. Roland, my apologies for the intrusion, Preston said, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. But the board received an anonymous tip last night regarding a severe deterioration in your health. We are simply here to ensure the CEO of Pendleton Global is fit to lead. Roland sat calmly in a heavy leather armchair at the head of the dining table. He was dressed impeccably in a 3-piece black suit. He didn't look sick. He looked like a king waiting for an execution. I assure you, Preston, my health is perfect, Roland said smoothly. We'll let Dr. Arris determine that, Preston sneered, signaling the doctor forward. If you refuse the blood draw clause, 44 is immediately invoked. Dr. Arris opened his medical briefcase, preparing a syringe. Mr. Pendleton, if you are experiencing a pheromone crash, your cortisol and adrenaline levels will be fatally high. Please roll up your sleeve. Preston smiled, waiting for the inevitable collapse. He knew Roland had no suppressants left. He knew the poison had done its work. That won't be necessary. A quiet, steady voice echoed from the hallway. Preston froze. Everyone turned. Oliver stepped out of the shadows and into the morning light. He wasn't wearing his oversized, cheap blue pharmacy polo. Roland had provided him with a tailored ivory silk shirt and dark trousers that fit him perfectly. But it wasn't his clothes that stopped the men dead in their tracks. It was his presence. Oliver had spent years chemically suppressing his biology, terrified of the attention it brought. Now he let the dam break. The scent of pure white tea and heavy cleansing rain flooded the penthouse. It wasn't submissive. It was profoundly grounding, overwhelmingly powerful in its purity. The moment Oliver's scent hit the air, Roland's own pheromones, the crushing winter frost and ozone, surged forward to meet it. The biological reaction was instantaneous. When a true fated Omega releases their scent to protect their alpha, the alpha's dominance is multiplied tenfold. The sheer atmospheric pressure in the room skyrocketed. Dr. Arris gasped, dropping the syringe as his knees buckled. The 3 corporate lawyers physically staggered backward, unable to breathe under the crushing weight of Roland's amplified aura. Even Preston, a dominant alpha himself, clutched his chest, his face turning a sickly shade of grey. He stared at Oliver, in absolute horror. A bonded mate! Dr. Aris choked out, falling into a chair. His biology, it's completely stabilized. He's operating at peak alpha efficiency. The crash is nullified. Roland stood up, moving with a lethal grace. He walked over to Oliver, wrapping a protective arm around the Omega's waist. He pulled Oliver flush against his side, burying his face in the crook of Oliver's neck, right over his scent gland, inhaling deeply in front of all of them. It was a blatant territorial display of absolute ownership. As my bonded Omega has just demonstrated, Roland rumbled his eyes, locking onto Preston. My biology is flawless. This is a trick, Preston hissed, gripping the edge of the table to keep himself standing. You pulled a stray off the street. I would be very careful with your next words, Preston. Roland interrupted his voice, dropping to a deadly whisper. Because my legal team has spent the last 6 hours tracing the offshore wire transfers you made to the Swiss pharmaceutical lab that manufactures my suppressants. Preston's arrogant sneer vanished instantly. The color drained from his face completely. Furthermore, Roland continued his grip, tightening protectively around Oliver. I have purchased a hostile-controlling 60% stake in Apex Financial as of 6 a.m. this morning. Gregory Thorne was terminated an hour ago, and the authorities are currently waiting for you in the lobby of this building to arrest you for corporate espionage, attempted murder, and the systemic abuse of unbonded Omegas. Preston opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The bitter scent of his fear fouled the air. Without a word, he turned and fled toward the elevator, the lawyers quickly scurrying after him. The doors closed. The penthouse fell silent once more. The crushing, aggressive alpha aura instantly dissipated from the room. Roland let out a long, shuddering breath, resting his forehead against Oliver's shoulder. The terrifying billionaire melted into a tired, grateful man. You did it! Roland whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You saved my life. Oliver turned in Roland's arms, looking up into the ice-blue eyes that no longer haunted his nightmares, but instead offered him safety. He reached up his fingers, gently tracing the sharp line of Roland's jaw. He didn't feel like a pawn. For the first time in his life, Oliver felt entirely, unquestionably powerful. No more running, Oliver said softly, a real smile finally breaking across his face. Never again, Roland promised, leaning down to capture Oliver's lips, sealing a bond that neither the elite of Houston nor the shadows of the graveyard shift could ever break. Wow, what an incredible journey. If Oliver and Roland's intense, high-stakes story kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow drama lovers who crave an epic, twist-filled romance. Want more thrilling stories, shocking betrayals, and fated mate absolute loyalty? Subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our next real-life inspired dramatic saga. See you next time.